Anishinaabe elder Basil Johnson tells of the time our teacher, Nanabosho, was fishing in the lake for supper, as he often did, with hook and line. Heron came striding along through the reeds on his long, bent legs, his beak like a spear. Heron is a good fisherman and a sharing friend, so he told Nanabosho about a new way to fish that would make his life much easier. Heron cautioned him to be careful not to take too many fish, but Nanabosho was already thinking about a feast. He went out early the next day, and soon he caught a basket full of fish, so heavy he could barely carry it, and far more than he could eat. So he cleaned all the fish and set them out to dry on the racks outside his lodge. The next day, with his belly still full, he went back to the lake and again did what Heron showed him. Ah, he thought as he carried home the fish, I will have plenty to eat this winter. Day after day, he stuffed himself, and as the lake grew empty, his drying racks grew full. They sent out a delicious smell into the forest where a fox was licking his lips. Again, he went to the lake, so proud of himself. But that day, his nets came back empty, and Heron looked down on him as he flew over the lake with a critical eye. When Nanabosho got home to his lodge, he learned a key rule. Never take more than you need. The racks of fish were toppled in the dirt, and every bite was gone. This an excerpt from Breeding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She writes, cautionary stories of the consequences of taking too much are ubiquitous in Native cultures, but it's hard to recall a single one in English. Perhaps this helps to explain why we seem to be caught in a tragic trap of overconsumption, which is as destructive to ourselves as to those we consume. Collectively, the indigenous canon of principles and practices that govern the exchange of life that is known as the honorable harvest. They are rules of sorts that govern our taking, shape our relationships with the natural world, and rein in our tendency to consume. That the world might be as rich for the seventh generation as it is for our own.
In this coming week, most of us will celebrate Thanksgiving, a holiday centered in gratitude. People across the country will gather around tables filled with food. Some will pause for a moment at the beginning of the meal for gratitude, for prayer perhaps, or for the naming of what we are thankful for. There are ways in which this holiday seems to be a pretty good example of the honorable harvest. It is, in fact, one of the few times a year for some of us that eating the fruits of the earth is accompanied with intentional gratitude. And yet, the supposed origins of this holiday were anything but honorable. The myth of the first Thanksgiving tells us that it was a peaceful, friendly meal between the early European settlers and the Native Americans who had helped them when they first came to this land. What we know now is that this story is full of gaps and even outright lies. Those European settlers were anything but kind to the Native Americans and claimed land that was not theirs to take. Though there may have been moments of peace and friendship, the overwhelming story of those early settlers was one of violence and theft, pushing out the indigenous people who had lived for years, pushing them out of their lands by force. In Plymouth, where the first Thanksgiving is said to have happened, indigenous people have gathered since 1970 on this fourth Thursday in November, not for celebrations and feasting, but instead for fasting and a day of mourning. They gather to mourn the lives and legacies of those who have been lost due to European colonization of the Americas, for the lands that have been stolen, and for the indigenous cultures that have been ignored and sometimes forgotten. These early colonizers were not practicing the honorable harvest. Like Nabosho in the story, they took and took and took, thinking only of themselves. And in so many ways, we continue to take and take and take, pausing maybe once a year to offer gratitude, but not much more than that. In Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Wall Kimmerer tells us that the honorable harvest goes even deeper than gratitude. It is about consent, asking and abiding by that answer. It's about respect, using what you take with intention and honor. And it's about reciprocity. From you I receive, to you I give. About what we give back to the earth to ensure that it will be here for 7 generations in the future. There are all kinds of ways that we need to get back in balance through practices of the honorable harvest. As Robin Wall Kimmerer writes, we need the honorable harvest today, but like leeks and the martin, it is an endangered species that arose in another landscape, another time, from a legacy of traditional knowledge. That ethos of reciprocity was cleared away along with the forests, the beauty of justice traded away for more stuff. One of the ways that we are seeking to restore balance, to live into gratitude and reciprocity that the honorable harvest calls for, is by looking at our own history as a congregation and figuring out how to hold the good and the bad of it in it. How to learn from the errors of our ancestors and how to make amends. We live and worship on stolen lands, marred by violence against people and against the land. One of the ways that we find hope for the future, for that 7th generation that comes after us, is by naming and acknowledging this history, by trying to bring back some balance to our earth, by honoring where we have come from. This is not easy work, and it is certainly not always comfortable, but it is vital to our survival and to the survival of our world. Our next anthem invokes that spirit, the spirit of hope, of all that we need to survive, and of that hard work of living into a better future.